County Board of Education Finance Committee of August 12th, 2021 will now begin. It is a hybrid video conferencing meeting, and the meeting will be live streamed by the county channel. A request for public comments will be accepted between 4 and 4:30, but no public comments were provided. The first agenda item is the Pledge of Allegiance. If you stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Motion has been moved and seconded. There is an issue on the agenda that at our last meeting, we said that we were going to have a discussion of OE6 paragraph 16 until the next Finance Committee meeting, which is this meeting. We did not, for one reason or another, did not put that on the agenda for this evening's meeting. So we're going to need to postpone it until our next meeting. So that is a change that you probably should have had on here, but oversight. So,
Colonel Geyer?
Yes.
After we approve the agenda, I can make a motion to postpone that indefinitely and provide some context to that.
Very good. Thank you. So we have a motion on the floor. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Motion passes 3-0.
So I move
Yes.
we indefinitely postpone that item in regard to the policy, I believe it was. What was it? OE 616?
OE6, paragraph 16.
Right. That was discussed in the policy committee, and I provided that in my report to the full board recently. So I don't believe that there's any need to discuss that one anymore. Do you remember hearing that at my report?
I do remember that now. And Ms. Fidrick is on it. Do you have anything that you wanted to add? Do we need to do anything more?
Thank you, Colonel Geyer. I do remember that, Rachel, you provided some information about the policy committee, but I really don't remember what the decision was regarding the two aspects of OE 6.16. What the policy committee decided.
Okay, I apologize if I had in my report, I thought what I had conveyed was that after the discussion, the policy committee thought that the policy should stand, and we clarified the intent. So if I misunderstood anything there, I mean, we certainly can bring it back to the finance committee, but it was my understanding that as it was written, the intent was clarified on that.
Right, so the intent was clarified, but the request from the Ops Committee was to bring it to the Finance Committee to discuss that intent under the light of some new information, some discussion that occurred at the Ops Committee. That was, I mean, again, I believe the intent was clarified, but the Ops Committee was hoping that that intent would be discussed again.
Okay, all right. Well then, since it wasn't seconded, I'll withdraw.
So we'll bring it up as a to do future topic for the next meeting.
Okay.
All right. We have no public comments. Do I have a motion to approve the July 10th, 2021 committee meeting minutes?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Moved by Earl Campbell,
Second.
seconded by Dr. Wisniewski. Any discussion?
I would just ask, Robin, I saw some small typos and things like that. If you could just look it over for that.
Okay.
And otherwise, the content's fine.
I'll review it again. Thank you.
No more discussion? I'll have a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 3-0. Our next item is debt service budget amendment. And Brian, I believe you're here to talk about that.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I was working with Ms. Crosby on sort of budget to actual. And I guess on May 18th, the board passed a debt service budget. And that was before things were fine tuned. In particular, there are two bond issues that have, one has been issued and closed, and the other is about to be issued. That is the 2021 C bond, which is your annual 8% borrowing. And then to make your installment purchase payment and your last acquisition payment, which was for activity buses. It was a financing for activity buses. There will be another bond issue that will sell on the end of September, beginning of August. August 1st, I believe, is the sale date. So there has been an adjustment for the sale of and final sizing of the 2021 C bonds. And then it still includes the estimate for the 2021 D bonds, but the number should not change materially to what is being shown in the amendment. Or I should say revised, because I believe that Ms. Crosby put the word revised at the top right.
Mhm.
And so the redemption of the principal and interest is in red. His changes are in red. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I provided those numbers to her, and she tied out as well.
Okay. Anything further you'd like to mention?
No, just that there'll be a slight change with the final sizing of the 2021 D bond, but I don't deem it to be material.
And so you need to have this approved by the full board at our next board meeting?
I think since you've gone through the process of approving a preliminary budget, and we now have a more concise number, I think it would be I think it would be appropriate to have it ratified.
Do I hear a motion to recommend to the full board that we approve the amended figures on this bond issue?
I'll make a motion that we
There it is.
I move that the finance committee recommends to the full board that the 2021-22 debt service fund budget expense to be amended in the amount of $79,274,891.
Have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. On the motion, is there any discussion?
Only I know this is not something that was changed, but I just wanted to ask if there could be clarification provided for the areas that have the percent change where they're bold and their totals, how that number is derived.
Brian, did you get that?
Yeah, I do not have that answer.
Okay.
That would be more of a Miss Crosby accounting type answer, but looking at it, it looks like it's a percentage change from maybe the budget to the actual. The increase decrease divided by a specific amount, but I'd have to see which column that it's being divided by.
Okay.
So it's the 4,113,000 divided by one of the other figures to come up with a change of 6.73%. That's what it appears to me. But I didn't produce the document, so I don't know exactly.
Thank you.
Reggie?
I can always ask at the full board meeting.
Brian, I believe that's the variance from the approved budget to the revised budget.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there any further discussion or questions? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 3-0. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is a discussion of 8% debt. As I recall, we were talking about that our last meeting. And the question is what amount of debt capacity, 8% debt capacity, should we retain as a target, not a policy, but as a target for the future as we go forward? Right now, as of 2021, we have a debt service or 8% debt capacity of $79,796,274. When I came on the board, we had a debt service capacity of about $20 million. So we have improved our debt service capacity considerably. The question is, should we have a target for how much debt capacity should we try to maintain in our 8%? Now, the reason I was thinking about that is I look at 8% as being our sort of like our line of credit. A company will have its operating capital, it'll have some reserve funds, and it'll also have a line of credit for emergencies or for opportunities. And they've already worked it out with the bank so that they can access this line of credit very quickly, because oftentimes in businesses you need to do that. I believe this 8% borrowing capacity is our line of credit. For example, if we had a major emergency, if we had a major hurricane and we had mass destruction, we have our operating reserves, our fund balance that we can immediately write checks. We have the P card that we can immediately give to a vendor to clean up debris or whatever. But other than that, we don't have anything that we can get quickly, with the exception of 8% debt capacity that we could borrow relatively quickly. And if you recall, when Hurricane Matthew was here and they had the mass tree blow down and so on Hilton Head Island, and we had companies from all over the US coming in to start cleaning up debris. Well, he who has the money right away got the first debris taken care of. And that's why it's important to be able to sign some checks quickly. These companies that come in and clean things up don't take IOUs, and they won't wait, and we can't wait for our insurance to come in and do its assessment and cut us a check. We do have insurance, but I would be surprised greatly if we could get funds in less than 60 days. FEMA also is there, and you can get that. We got that 3 years later. So it would seem to me, what amount of debt capacity should we have to be able to handle a major disaster? I've been doing a little research about what other companies do or have in their lines of credit. And most companies that I was able to find keep between 5 and 10% of their total insured property capital. And that's what they use as a basic starting point for how much their credit limit should be, your line of credit should be. Now, last I heard, and Reggie, you can tell me about this, is we are insured for around $750 million.
I don't think so.
That was probably a couple years ago, so probably $8 million right now. So when I also looked at it, I said, well, what kind, say somebody like Walmart, they don't have that much. They probably have about 5% because they're so scattered across the nation that it's not going to be one disaster that's going to take out all the Walmarts. It's going to be a couple Walmarts in a couple areas. Companies that have very limited amount of space that's changed, like for example, the Boeing plant at Everett. I found out that they keep at least 10% of that plant, the value of that plant in a line of credit that's kind of designated for emergencies. If something happened, if they had an earthquake, which they have in the Seattle area, they would need about that amount to get immediate response. And obviously, that building is probably worth more than all of our capital assets together. So given that, at 79 million, that's about 10% of our insured value. So that seems to me, and I make that for discussion, should be about what we should try to maintain as we go forward. Now, having said that, if you look at the growth of debt capacity that's been anticipated, that is going to grow to 91 million next year, 94 million the year after, 103 million the year after, 107 million. So it's going to grow as we pay off, especially the 8% short-term stuff that we borrowed for the Performing Arts Center and the gymnasium at Whale Branch and for May River. And the reason I bring that up, the growth, is because I also see some need for 8% money in the near term. And that need based on the south of the broad growth that we are anticipating based on what the county planners, based on what the county treasurer has told us. We may need to borrow some land, buy some land relatively quickly. And that is a decent view or pot of money, I think, to look at buying some property is using 8% funds to do that. We're not talking $10 million. We're not talking $5 million. We're talking probably in the $2 to $4 million, depending on where the property is. That is one thing that I see coming down the road as a possibility. The second thing is, given the growth potential, we may need to use some 8% money to do some site prep and some engineering work and some prepare for rapid construction after a potential next referendum happens. As you'll recall, 2.5 years ago, the board was going to use 8% money to build the additions to May River High School and River Ridge Academy, and we stopped that based on the fact that we could use 8% money, and I believe it was not more than $1 million for the two, do this, the site work and everything, the engineering work, so it was ready to go when the referendum passed. That's how we were able to pass a referendum in November and break ground in January. And so that was a good use of 8% money, and it's something that we may need to use in the future. So that's kind of a long-winded discussion on 8% debt. Do I have any comments?
Usually we should have it at 5% or 10%.
I think 10%.
10%. Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be best.
Again, because if we get hit by a major hurricane in the Beaufort area, it's likely to hit more than one school.
Yeah.
Any other comments? Dr. Wisniewski, what do you think?
So what was the proposed, what is the present amount and what was the proposed amount that you were saying?
80 million. 80 million would be 10% of 800 million worth of capital we have insured.
Okay.
And Brian, oh, go ahead.
Right, I was gonna, and 20 million of that presently is about what our summer projects are. Is that correct?
Correct.
Mhm.
Correct. And that's another issue that I'm glad you mentioned that. Right now, we pay $20 million a year. We can do that mainly because we're doing a whole bunch of referendum work. And we may have to have another referendum based on what the citizens-led committee that went out and looked at all our schools, and they came up with a $600 million bill for referendum. When you look at that, the $20 million, we'll take care of a lot of those projects with that next referendum. But I also did some research about how much you should have in reserve or in line of credit for maintenance, or how much should you plan to spend on maintenance every year. So I looked at some different companies, said, how much do you set aside? Kind of like your house. You buy your house for $300,000 and you have a mortgage of, say, $1,500 a month. They say that you should put about $100 aside every month. So when the roof needs to be replaced, you got the roof. So I looked at what companies keep for maintenance on their capital projects, and that's about 3 to 5% of their value. So if you look at that, we should probably be spending anywhere from 20 to $40 million a year on maintenance every year as you go forward. After the referendum and we've got everybody up at a certain level of modern upgrades, then we'll probably have to have more than $20 million a year for maintenance to preclude us from having to have another massive referendum. Because if you take care of it little at a time, then you won't have to go to the voters and ask for a big chunk of money.
Right.
And if you look at this, when you plan this out strategically, you can see that we will probably be able to do that and not really, we might even be able to reduce our millage on what we need to keep that, because we're going to be paying down more 8%. We'll have less maintenance that we have to do on our newly remodeled buildings, but yet a lot of what we spend is on technology, and that's going to continue, if not more. So that's another issue that I was thinking about on 8%, on how you should look at 8% money, not only now but in the future.
You make some really good points there, and I think some of those data points are ones that we need to ask more questions on, specifically with regard to the summer projects or the 20 million that we expend. I know that the operations department and probably Ms. Fidget could speak to this a little bit, but I know that they do a great job of whittling down those projects to what's going to fit within that $20 million restriction, if you will. And I wonder often, what's falling off that list. And I know now we have the red line list where we can look under that and see what was next up. So I think looking at our historic, what did we not get to do? What is in our 10-year plan to be done in the next few years would give us some good data points as we look to extend this. And then also the technology component of how much of a spend has that been over for perhaps the past 5 years yearly, how much is coming from 8%, so that we can budget and plan for those things more appropriately. I don't know if Ms. Fidget's, I see her hand is one up there. You
I see your hands up. Tricia.
Thank you. Yes, there are significant number of projects, and Dr. Wisniewski, to your point, if you look at that 10-year plan, you can see where some of them have been from years past, and an emergency arises, and then all of a sudden, it gets pushed further down. Now we have a new system of doing it, so we've got below the black line, below the red line, and so on. The discussion on OE 6.16 could help with some of that, because what that policy says right now is that we must decrease our bond issuance accordingly if we use any of the unused 8% funds, if we roll any of them forward. It's an and statement. It's not an or, it's an and. So that's why it was important to the Ops Committee that Finance take a look at that. There are some fiscal year 18, fiscal year 19 8% funds that it's been closed out, and those funds can help us work on some of those projects that are needed. So that's number one. So that's why that policy, I think, is important to be discussed again. Secondly, did I hear Mr. Murphy? Is he in the room?
Yes, he is.
Okay, so I think Mr. Murphy could tell us a little bit about it, how long we have been at a 20 million 8% bond issuance. And we all know that we have added school buildings, and we all know that our school buildings have gotten older and are deteriorating more. So, Mr. Murphy, could you share a little bit? Do you know how long the board has approved and how long it stayed at $20 million for 8% funds?
Ms. Bendrick, I don't know when it began. I've been here 11 years, and it's been 20 million every year.
Yeah.
So, except for a couple of years where I think we reduced it, but for the most part, it's been 20 million every year. When you think about $20 million over 10 or 11 years, the real value of $20 million is probably somewhere around 15 million.
Yeah.
So over time, you've lost the effect of what you're doing just by having the cap at $20 million. Because construction typically escalates at 3% a year, just the cost of construction. In addition to those things that you just mentioned about the new facilities and the aging of the facility. So over time, the $20 million effect has diminished.
Right, thank you, thank you. So I think that the consideration of increasing what we would be using for 8% for capital projects is a very worthy conversation. I am a little confused, though, that if we jump to an 80 million bond issuance to have as a rainy day fund for just, in case there's that emergency, there's that hurricane that comes through and destroys several buildings, and say we use, 25 or 20, right now 20 for capital expenditures, where does that other 60 million sit? What is done with that 60 million? So if I could have a little explanation about that.
The other 66, could you say that again? I didn't understand where you got 60 million.
Okay, so, and perhaps I'm not understanding this correctly, but if we're suggesting, Dick, if I heard you correctly, you're suggesting maybe going to an 80 million bond, because of having some ready credit availability. Are you actually suggesting issuing an 80 million bond so that, no, okay. All right, so it's just
No. It stays, it's your borrowing capacity. It's your line of credit that you have readily available. It's sitting there. You haven't asked for it. You might not need it. And if you do need it, well, you pay it back later. I wouldn't say that we should keep 80 million as a floor that can't be gone below. I think we should have it as a goal to keep about 80 million in borrowing capacity. But if you look at it, we could buy, right now we have 80 million right now in there. By, let's see, it's 2026, we'll be up to $107 million. And by 27, we're at $126 million if we don't, borrow more. So does that clear it up a little bit, Tricia?
It does. Thank you.
Okay, and Mr. Sturmaguri, I see your hand is up.
Thank you, Dick. Listening to what Reggie said, I think it's a good point. I think we need to adjust that 20 million to account for inflation, especially with inflation in construction now. But even if we just peg it to the CPI, we could make a change where that limit, whatever we set it at, increases each year by the cost of living, to build that in so we don't forget about it. Going back to Tricia's thing about the policy, there's no need to change the policy because it's saying like this 2018 surplus is going to roll forward to the current bonding year, and we're not going to issue bonds for that same amount. In other words, we're not going to borrow money that we already have. We're going to use that money. So that's fine. It's a good discipline. I think Brian will agree. That's a good discipline to have. You don't spend your found money. You don't borrow more money. But that changed this year because there won't be any excess with this year because it rolls down to those projects under the line. So that policy is probably going to sunset, in 4 years. Hopefully that provides some clarity. But on the 8% debt, I'm pretty sure that if we set it at $350 million a year, that the operations department would find $350 million that we could spend it on. So we have to act a little bit as a governor on that, because as you pointed out before, there are some projects on there from 2014 where the flip side of that question is if they've gone this long, were they really necessary to begin with? But we have to provide some governor, or we will spend every penny we can get our hands on, because there's always better things or newer things or cooler things you can do. And our track record on buying property hasn't been very good either. We have a lot of property that we can't even use. I think we have a parcel out by the ACUS. Can't put a school in there because of the ACUS. And we can't apparently sell it either. And we have these little drips and drabs of property that we haven't been real good at. And that's just a snarky comment. But I do think we should work in inflation. If nothing else, maybe suggest to the board that if 11 years ago, we established 20 million. Okay, adjusting, for what that would be this year, let's raise it by that. There's no question to that. And then if we think we need more, that could be a second step. But I don't think anybody's going to argue that we should adjust it for inflation, right? But if at 4% inflation over 18 years, it doubles. So, we're closing in on that money only being worth about half what it was. So I think we definitely should make that motion to modify it, allowing for inflation. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Ingrid, you have your hand up.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, I'm I hesitate to even add anything because the finance thing, I'm still figuring it out. But it seems to me that we have created this governance, and it, from a new person observation, it seems unnecessarily blunt and inflexible. Now that I've been on finance or operations committee for 6 months, I understand the need to not spend. I'm sure we could spend every dime that we got. I would be curious to know how other school districts that don't have like a sales tax, other school districts like ours, how they handle their 8%. Just because this cap, I don't know if that's unique to us or not, or if some district, it'd be interesting to me to find out how other districts handled it. Because what I see also as problematic is almost every operations committee meeting, and sometimes we have several a month, something comes up where it's not an emergency and it's not sort of a thing you can plan well in advance for. And it's an acute. It's something like, hey, if we need this money sometime in the next 6 months to take advantage of this program. And the example, like just recently, was there's an opportunity for us to have 17 free school buses if we can build a propane station somewhere south abroad. But we need like $200,000. Well, so then we spent 20 minutes trying to figure out, could we take it from 8% 2018? Could we take it from 8% 2023 and put it somewhere between the red and the black line? Should we push it off to 2024? And it just seems like we're trying to come up with all these workarounds when we have the money, we have the capacity in the line of credit. It's an opportunity. It's not an emergency, but we have given up all of our flexibility and made this kind of convoluted process. But like I said, I don't know what everyone else is doing.
Good, thank you.
Maybe we could check with, Greenville.
Go ahead, can you speak a little louder?
No, you can check with Greenville.
Greenville?
And see what they do.
I was gonna say Brian, he does it in a lot of school districts.
Yeah,
Ask Brian.
You ask Brian.
Yeah.
Please.
we could have somebody from the finance department do a little check.
He was saying, ask Brian. He's on the.
Oh, Brian, yeah, right, Brian,
So
so you know.
I actually represent Greenville County School District and was on, I was actually on iteration number 10 today. So they're in the mix of their program. So their school district's a little different. Every school district is different. They operate where they issue one bond per year and then pay it off. During the installment purchase revenue bond era, they issued about $1 billion in installment purchase revenue bonds. They were able to get a lot of construction done. And so now they're in this mode where they use their 8% debt limit to both make payments on the installment purchase revenue bonds, and then they bring in an amount of money per year to fund, schools and so forth over, if they're going to build a new high school, it might take them, say, 3 years worth of debt issuances to pay the school off. And so they constantly go back and forth on how much 8% debt limit they're going to issue per year, what that mill rate is. They live within a dedicated mill rate. But from time to time, when they update their program for the current needs and what school needs to be moved up and done more quickly, and those types of situations, they do adjust their mill rate. It seems about every 5 years. When I was looking at it today, it seems, I should just go ahead and say 10 years ago, they raised it 5 mils, and then 5 years ago, they raised it 4.5 mils. So that's how they do it. They sort of live through their 8% while they're paying off their installment purchase revenue bonds. If it's okay with you, Colonel Geyer, I'd like to kind of touch on a few points that
Sure.
just listening to the conversation I think might be helpful. First is sort of compartmentalizing the policy. I think it's OE 617, the maintain a 10% of insured value capacity and 8% funds. So I think that's a great, it's a great policy. I think it's one that, will need to be flexible potentially over a long period of time. Your 8% valuation, or your 8% is based upon your assessed valuation, and that doesn't necessarily, that calculation, grow at the rate of inflation. So you've got your insurance that might grow at the rate of inflation, and then the AV that won't. I don't see it being a problem in the near term. I'm just throwing that out there as, you might need to be a little bit flexible on that percentage if there's something that can't be predicted were to occur. If there was a natural disaster, and this policy would be different for, say, a Coney County. That's far, top left corner of the state versus, in which I do their work, versus Beaufort County, because we are a coastal community. The way it would work is if you wanted to access the money through a bond, we would have to go to the board, we'd have to pass a resolution, and then go through the process to have a competitive sale. But you could also access the funds through a bond anticipation note. Still would be full faith and credit, but it could be done on a negotiated basis more quickly. So both would require one reading of a resolution by the board, and then us in conjunction with your bond counsel would go to the capital markets and get you those funds. And as long as that 8% capacity is available to you, you can access it and use those funds. I never really had thought through this piece, but I was particularly interested in the concept of thou who gets there first is going to pay a cheaper rate than thou who gets there 10th. So the idea that it's sort of pre-planned, I think is a very positive piece to this. The other thing outside of this item that's really more into this 8% item that's going to come up for discussion when I come back on August 27th, and I am available on August 26th as well before we go to the full board, is the 8% amount that you borrow per year. I just, in the model that I'm working with, increased it to 25 million. And I'm working on the payback of is it 1 year or is it 5 years? Historically, the items that are being funded through 8%, and the reason that you're about to increase your 8% capacity is because, in particular, the May River high school project is going to pay off here. Is what is the appropriate term for the assets we're financing? If we're financing buses, they would have a different useful life than if we're financing paint, or if we're financing a computer, or if we're financing a chair, whatever it may be, or a roof. And so we have this constant balance between your needs and your taxation. And then you get into, well, what is the appropriate millage amount on the taxation side to cover enough of our needs? And I agree. I've never had a school district that ever met all its needs. And they just walked in one day and said, hey, Brian, we're good. And, we could all go home. We've covered all our needs. The needs will always be there. And at 36.3 mils, you're trying to cover, as many needs as arise through your 8%. And then down the road, I assume there could potentially be, on the referendum program side, another referendum. And I'm going to steal Colonel Geyer's words that I heard him say, wouldn't it be nice to be able to do a future referendum without a tax increase? Well, to do that, it requires a lot of planning ahead of time, which we're currently trying to position the school district to be able to have flexibility and opportunities in that arena. So part of the need side, and is it 20 million or is it 25 million? Part of the discussion, or that equation that brings somewhat of a natural balance here, is the term in which you're paying back the 8%. So if you were Greenville, right, you would borrow that 8%, your 20 to 25 million, but you would pay it back in 6 months. And then you would repeat the process. Here, we are borrowing funds, and I currently have them at a 3-year repay back. And historically, in many discussions prior to today, I've said, it's been said to me, hey, Brian, when would we reduce our millage amount? And I would say, well, if it was for me, I would say when we could afford to pay back this bond in a 1-year period. That would be like the ideal situation for the financial advisor. We're not in that position right now. If you said, hey, next year, Brian, budget for a $25 million bond offering and pay it back in 1 year, most of you aren't going to get reelected because you're going to throttle that mill rate. So we're still in this discussion of these balances that kind of naturally give you boundaries. And I would like to see the 8% program, be a 1 year. I don't see that in the near term. If you want to do a bond referendum in the future without a tax increase, we're probably going to have more of a 4-year payback to be able to afford a meaningful amount of money to take care of a meaningful amount of needs when that voter question goes without a tax increase. But that's the beauty of the 8% program. It's got elasticity. We can shorten it to a shorter term in years in which we have some capacity, but we have to project out that we may not have that capacity in the future because we have other needs that are going to arise, and the referendum program needs to be complemented. So I think there'll be some additional clarity on all these natural balances that occur through this concept of needs and taxation. And, is there going to be a point in time when, your needs diminish to where you can lower that mill rate? That's the beauty of the pro forma. And, I'm prepared to present what I have to date. And I think it will spur additional conversation about, positioning the district for the future. But in the model that I have right now, and of course, it's always subject to board adjustment, I have already increased it to $25 million a year. You still have plenty of debt limit capacity available, and you can cover this policy of, the holdback of the 80 million, and you still have some additional capacity if you ever were in the need to use it. So again, that's a lot to absorb. There's a lot of factors and variables, but that building program, the funding program that I produce, those 6 to 8 pages are kind of the Bible of a lot of these decisions. And I just don't want to see the district fall behind with deferred maintenance. And I think there should be some conversation on the need side, which is not what I deal with. I don't deal with the need side. I deal more with the taxation side and the funding side. But I think in some of the conversations that I had before the board meeting, there seemed to be some focus on identifying, just how much the 8% program should fund per year, and ensuring that whatever it ends up being, you don't end up with a deferred maintenance issue. And I agree with Reggie that as far as I can remember, it's always been 20 million. I don't know. There are very few years in which it wasn't 20 million. It might have changed a small amount here or there for a project that came on or fell off, but it certainly has been $20 million for an extended period of time.
Thank you, Brian. There's another variable, and that's the assessed value of owner occupied houses in this county. And that affects the value of the mill. And anecdotally, what we're hearing of the, assessed value, the first assessed value on a home is when it's sold. So let's say that I had a home that I bought for $200,000 and I was assessed at $200,000, and I got a reassessment and maybe it went up to $220,000. And the last reassessment, it did go up slightly. But now that $200,000 home is probably selling for $350,000. So the value of the mill, and what we're looking at from what we got from Mrs. Walls, Maria Walls, from the treasurer, that value of the assessed value of the county is going up considerably. So that means the value of the mill goes up considerably. That's always what happens in inflation, is the tax rate stays the same, but you're in a higher tax bracket. And so I don't see a real problem in keeping it 36.3. I think that we're going to be just fine and not have to raise millage unless the county decides to do that. Remember, we don't have fiscal autonomy.
Yeah.
And that's going to be an issue. Any other comments? Yes, Dr. Wisniewski.
Brian, I'm not sure if you can correct me on this or not, but and to Dick's point right now about the reassessment, it's my understanding that there's also an act, I think it's Act 402, that caps the, during the reassessment, I think it's 15% of whatever the increase was.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
That's correct. That's
just for
correct. So,
others out there that are listening, there might be big increases right now, but there is a cap on that by law. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Right.
yeah, so, and there are kind of two changes you see in non-reassessment years. You kind of have what's called point of sale. So when there's a point of sale, then it will adjust on the tax roll. And then you have the situation where, somebody's reassessed and their property may have increased 20% or 25%. And especially now with inflation, but you're going to have an artificial cap of 15% put on that, unless there becomes a point of sale.
Yeah, it's really magic, because not only that, but you don't get a note from the treasurer's office saying, hey, you turned 65, you can apply for homesteader.
No, they don't. do that.
They don't tell you that. I lost about 3 years before I figured that out and went in and got it. But that's what makes the value of the mill so hard to determine, because you've got point of sale changes, and you got somebody, I'm 65, I get a cut on my assessed value. So that's hard business. That's what we got to live with, I guess. Any other questions for Brian, or any other questions on this topic?
I just was going to ask Brian, you're coming on the 27th to the full board, correct?
That's correct. And I'll be available limited periods of time on the 26th, and then I'm available Zoom the whole month.
Okay. I think the comments that you just made about the term of the bonds is really important for the full board to discuss. I work in the school bond space, and I see school districts across the country who have these programs, and those that are successful in passing referenda and not having deferred maintenance issues are those that are able to roll off debt in a quicker amount of time and assume new debt and just continue plugging away at that list that is always growing. So I think that's going to be a really important discussion for the full board.
Okay. And I just want to reiterate one comment that I made before, and it's kind of the central theme. And it's, we've established this tax rate of 36.3 mils, and between the 8% program and the referendum program, we're trying to fund as many needs as possible. And the board and the administration determine those needs. I get those needs, and I put together, these funding programs and try to find the optimal balance between all these factors. And the one piece I've spent about, I'm sorry to say, I've spent about 8 hours at this kind of a fun set of iterations, but I actually I worked on a what if you did another referendum without a tax increase I just artificially used 300 million in 2024 and said, okay, how can I fit this in and the referendum program? What happens? And can I keep 25 million at 36.3? What is the term of the referendum? How is it structured? And what I'm running into in doing that what if scenario is that this next bond we issue, the balance of the referendum, it affects that greatly. And so I'm having to now go back, and I'm going to do another iteration after the August 27th meeting to or fine tune the amortization of this final allotment of the last referendum to make sure I don't have any hiccups in the mill rate down the road. And I don't know, because it's so far out, whether or not the board would vote to do another bond referendum and for how much, but I want to at least plan for, some placeholder amount, so I don't pigeonhole you by a decision that's made today. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Good stuff.
Go ahead, Rachel.
Oh, I was just saying thank you for running those different scenarios, because that's the kind of proactive and forward-thinking kind of things that we need to be doing. And talking about.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to step on that as well. That's what the bond council is supposed to do for us. And I'm so glad that you're back as bond counsel, Brian.
Financial advisor.
Right? Yeah, financial advisor, right?
Thank you. I'm glad to be back. I was having a discussion with one of the board members and going through some of the items. And ironically, my first child was born in 2003. My second was born in 2006. And I have one senior and one freshman. So they're one's getting ready to leave the coop here. And I started doing work in Beaufort sometime in 2002, 2003, or 2004. So my path of my children and path of managing Beaufort School District's debt program sort of, they have a lot of parallels to them. And so this is one I deeply know and I've been involved with for a long time and I'm very passionate about the area as well. And so glad to be back and, here to help.
Thank you, Brian. The next item on our agenda is OE 6.2, Minority Women-Owned Business Enterprise Report.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Miss
Kaden,
Miss Yanger's gonna make that presentation. She's still on.
yes.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Perfect. So this is the Minority and Women Business Enterprise Semi-Annual Progress Report. This is for the period of January 1, 2021 through June 30, 2021. This is in accordance with OE 6.2. We did update with the superintendent's interpretation since the last semi-annual report, so that's a little bit different there, but not much else has changed for the cover sheet. Moving on to page 2, let's start the summary. Section 1 is funds expended, and this was the controllable budget. It's a 6-month figure, which is $78,290,571. The goal established for the Minority Women Business Enterprise Utilization Report during FY 2020 was 20%, and of that 78 million would have been $15,658,114.10. The total dollars expended or awarded to certified minority women business enterprise was $958,257.87, which was 1.22% of the controllable budget. The total dollars expended to non-certified was $3,877,084.91, which was 4.95% of the controllable budget. So the total expended dollars to all minority women business enterprise was $4,835,342.78, which was about 6.18% of the controllable budget. Out of all the solicitations that we did 13 for goods and services and 1 for construction. None of those received any bids from certified minority women business enterprise, and none were awarded because we did not receive any that were certified. 3 of those were canceled, 2 have not been awarded yet. Well, they may have been awarded now, but not when this report was created, and 8 was awarded, and the construction and renovation was awarded during that period. So actual dollars paid to certified minority women business enterprise broken up between minority and women owned. The majority was minority at $927,995.05 and $30,262.82 to women. And again, this is just certified. And that was split between 6 different certified vendors, 5 of those being minority certified and 1 of those being one woman certified. Section 4 is just a summary of the types of purchases that we've done through minority women business enterprises. And the historical goal was the graph below that, showing all the historical figures of our goal based where our actual for the past 5-6 years. And the next graph after that shows the distinction of percentage based on non-certified minority women business type and the percent of certified minority women business type. And in our conscious effort to acquire more minority and women business owned, for women-owned businesses. We have put in place, we placed on the website, working with Beaufort County School District, the vendor handbook. We place ads in the local newspaper, and we also do radio ads semi-annually, typically February and August, with information of proposed future projects. We held a minority vendor fair in 2021, and we have outreach by CBRE Heary, our project management contractor, by posting opportunities to the website as well. Do we have any questions?
Any questions?
No.
No questions? Do I hear a motion?
I move that the Finance Committee recommend to the full board to accept OE 6.2 Minority Business Enterprise Report for the 6-month period ending June 30, 2021.
Do I hear a second?
Second, and it looks like we have a hand.
Okay, Mr. Smith?
Can you tell me the process of bringing these forward? Not
Bringing the
Go ahead.
vendors or the report, sir?
The vendors.
So with the vendors, we reach out, we advertise on South Carolina business opportunities, which is mandated by the procurement code, both state and local procurement code. Then we hold vendor fairs twice a year. We emailed that information out to the Chamber of Commerce and the Black Chamber of Commerce, and a few other contacts that CBR Heary has helped us with. Also with the minority vendors that Heary has worked with, they've bought a couple on board themselves. And we also put in our solicitations that it is highly recommended that our construction, whether it be architect or any kind of contractor or any of our large contractors, work with subcontractors, which is a very large makeup of our minority and women business enterprise reporting, is subcontractors through our large contractors.
And when you put you put an RFP for this out, correct?
For our projects during the year, yes, but this is just a snapshot of our 6 months of everybody that we've done business with through all of our projects
Thank you.
and purchases.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Hearing none, seeing no hands, I'll call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion carries 3-0. Next topic is future topics. Have any future topics?
OE 6.
OE 6.
We'll put that on there, right?
Yes, it's-
I had one that I wanted to explore. In doing some research, I found that the last study that was done in regard to Beaufort County and the impact that Act 388 has had on Beaufort County School District, I believe it was conducted in 2013. It was, I believe, paid for by the South Carolina Realtors Association and in cooperation with the local Realtors Association. I don't know if we want to perhaps review that and see if we should approach them to get an updated report done, or perhaps do our own digging into some of those findings, because a lot of the things that are in that report are interesting.
Good.
And I can send you it's on, it's archived online, but I can send a link to the 2013 one if you'd like.
great. Any other topics? Hearing none. It's 6:04. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion. Second. Thank you.
Thank you.